The DIESOL podcast.
Digital integration in English as a second or other language.
Episode 33, Dustin Staats from Board Gaming with Education.
Hello and welcome to DIESOL. This is episode 33. We are your hosts. I am Brent Warner.
And I'm Michelle Reyes. Hey Brent, how's your COVID?
It's mostly gone, I think. I actually right now I have a dry cough thing, so there's like these weird after effects, that's what scares me really, is like I know I'm not contagious anymore, but it's like it still lingers, and that's kind of a bit annoying.
Yeah. So. Well, we're also halfway through January.
I can't believe it. It's already it's moving along so fast. So today we have a new guest with us, Dustin Staats. Dustin, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you, Brent and Michelle, for having me on. I want to say that intro is awesome. It gets me fired up to be here, and I'm sure anyone listening gets fired up to hear these conversations.
Yeah, it's like people get the blood flowing and everything, right? So Dustin, you are a board gamer, a gamer of different sorts. You are the owner and director of Board Gaming with Education, and you're focused on building and growing your community of Board Gaming with Education. There's a lot of cool stuff going on with what you're doing, and we wanted to talk to you because you also have a podcast too, which is Board Gaming with Education, and you have a lot of great episodes. I started listening over the winter break, and I was like, oh, there's all these great ideas, and I really liked how there's so many different approaches to education going on inside of there, and so you have some experience teaching ESL. Can you tell us just a little bit about your teaching history?
Yeah, sure. Well, first, thank you guys so much for checking out the show. Really excited to hear that you've learned some things from it and taken away some great things too. For my experience, mainly I have, again, my background's in English language teaching. I've done some other things in after school programs. A lot of teachers that work abroad and teach English abroad, we do some private tutoring. I've done some of that as well as some consulting. But now I'm doing Board Game with Education full-time in Los Angeles. We develop resources based around hobby board games or mass market board games. We talk with our community about employing the best game-based teaching and gamification strategies.
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about before we really get into all the different parts is understanding board games today. Because I think one of the things you've talked about on your show was board games today are not the same as they were 10 years ago, or in my case, 25 years ago, or whatever it is, right? Where you're saying like, hey, I'm used to Monopoly and we go around in a circle, or even, I'm Clue and I'm just going to pick up a couple of things and then that's kind of the end of the game. Can you just talk from your experience about how you think games have evolved and what people might want to know if they haven't played a lot of games past the Monopoly level? Like, what do we expect? What does the gaming world look like now?
Right. Yeah. I mean, and you bring up a really good point too, because that was one of my, I guess, frustrations early on in English language teaching when I looked for engaging activities, looked for like ESL games. A lot of them didn't seem like they were making good use of the classroom time or not very effective. Like Hangman, for example, that comes up pretty frequently as a game to play in your ESL classroom, but it's not super effective. Or the roll and move games where you roll the dice, you move a few spaces, you ask a question, you answer a question. Now that's awesome learning tool, but it's not the most effective game-based learning activity because it's not super engaging with some of these newer game mechanics that you can use in the classroom that I've kind of learned from playing modern board games. And if that is my only tip to give any teacher, and I think it's a good one, is just to play more games. Definitely check out some other games, but an example that I can kind of compare to board games and how they've kind of evolved, and both are great for language teaching. One's called Taboo. If you're not familiar with this game, you have a word like apple, and I'm trying to get my team to guess the word apple, but there are 4 words I cannot use to get them to guess it. like red, fruit, tree, maybe Washington, or Johnny Appleseed. I don't remember. I don't know. Washington, he's famous for the apple trees, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not a terrible exercise to do in class, but what game-based learning and some modern board games you can look at are ways to make it a little bit more effective. And a couple things that I like to highlight that makes a good activity to use in your classroom for game-based learning is it's simple to teach. It involves everyone in the learning. That doesn't necessarily mean everyone has to be engaged in the game at all times, but there's something going on in their head as others are playing. And then everyone's involved in playing the game in some way. So Trap Words is a game that's like Taboo, but instead of the card giving you the words, the other team has to come up with the words to put on that card. And so what you have happening, you have the other team thinking of the words to put on the card. Also, when the other team's guessing your clue, they're trying to listen to the words they put on the card. So there's that extra layer of listening comprehension and the word association going on in the learning and the game.
I have not heard of Trap Words before.
It's one of my favorite-ish party games. I have like 3 or 4 now. So,
so talking about games for bigger groups versus smaller groups. So we know that party games are a great way to start. Sometimes I've heard teachers, they'll say, for example, with Taboo, well, it's too hard for the students because there are 6 words and that makes it very hard. And I think oftentimes we forget that you're not bound to those rules that the publisher printed there, right?
Right. Yeah. And that's one thing that I would say don't be scared about is modifying the rules, because you're not bringing this game in the classroom to be a rule follower, very strict to the game's rules. You're bringing the game in the classroom to enhance learning. And if you can even think of rules that provide a more effective way to teach the material, I think that's an added plus. But even just modifying the game to make it usable in the classroom is 100% like okay to do.
Yeah, I think I think by now a lot of people are familiar with the game Pandemic, and that's a game that
too soon.
At first I thought, well, we're never gonna. Yeah, I know, but I used to bring that into my class because of the collaborative nature of it. Except the rules are a little bit complicated for even my more advanced language learners. So what I did is I let the students come up with the rules. And sure enough, a couple of them came up with a system that worked, and we tested it out, and they decided what worked and what didn't. And then we came up with rules. I wrote them down, and now I've got, sticky notes on there for the next time we play it. So, not being afraid to change the rules, break the rules. The pieces are just there for you to have a tool and start off with something.
That's super awesome. That's something I like to design games as a hobby, and that's a very first step to game design. So you're teaching a little bit of game design too, is taking a game that's already out there with the components, thinking of new rules for it. That's so cool.
So so Dustin, I kind of want to follow up on that then. If you're saying like you're making up your own games, right? What would, I know this is impossible just to do overall, but like for you, what are the broad steps for creating a game, or how do you decide, hey, this is something that I think would help people have a chance to interact or to learn something, or where do you go from that? Because I feel like a lot of people think like I kind of have an idea, but then they don't know that they're like, are there mechanics and steps for developing a game?
Right. I would say my most successful games are the ones I've designed for the classroom, because they don't have to be these really, there's a term in the game industry or hobby board games is like a broken game. And those are games that are just unfair, or the rules aren't specifically laid out, and there's some rule sets that kind of you can work around. And but what I've been able to do is take some games based on other games I've played, or game mechanics from games I've played. So for example, I developed a negotiation game for my business English class in Taiwan. I can't remember the exact grammar structures they had to use or the vocabulary, but I incorporated that in the game as something they should use as they're talking with other companies in the class. So I broke the class up into groups. Each group had a company, and I used something called limited or secret information, which is a game mechanic that a lot of more modern board games use, where every company, they have these resources that they're able to use to negotiate with other companies to fulfill a secret agenda. It was a lot of work. It took, I probably spent about 10 hours just kind of thinking of this, but I saw it as something that I could use in the future as a very engaging activity. And, including other activities centered around that game. Like they had to come up to the class and they had to give their offer out to the company and say, we'll offer you, I think I used like iPhones, we'll offer you 10 iPhones to give us like $10,000 or something. And that company's maybe goal was to increase their sales, where another company might be to acquire 10 iPhones, but they don't really know which one. So there's definitely, they have to be able to go out and talk to other companies to be able to fulfill their goal.
That is really cool. I get so excited thinking about the things that I could do with my class or how I could tweak it if I'm not teaching business English, whatever it is that I'm teaching.
Yeah, I definitely miss it, not teaching English as a second language since it's been like a year and a half since I've been out of the classroom.
So you mentioned that you used the game Werewolf to look at modal verbs. And if you could explain a little bit of what Werewolf is. I know what it is. I think I've played different versions, but I'd like to hear how you used it with modal verbs and what you did in the classroom for that.
Yeah, so with that research, I was specifically looking at whether games encouraged English language learning, because I was teaching in Taiwan and students aren't very, I would say they're pretty discouraged with learning English. But it's very important in Taiwan because it's directly related to an increase in salary. When you're able to perform well on the English test, you can put that on your resume and you usually get paid more. So thinking of ways to engage students to want to come to class instead of skipping my English class. I wanted to look at games and if this is something that they would say, yeah, if we did this, we'll come to class. So that was the biggest goal with it, was to see, well, does this drive engagement? But I also wanted to center it around a modal verb activity that we were learning in our English book. Wasn't a super big fan of our English book, so I tried to come up with activities around it. And it was really successful. Werewolf is essentially a secret role game. So again, that same mechanic where everyone in the class is either a werewolf or a villager. And you go to sleep at night and the werewolves wake up and they decide the villagers they want to eat. The werewolves go to sleep, everybody wakes up, and you try to figure out who the werewolf is. It's a really great game. My background's, yeah,
I have it.
Yeah, so it's a really great game for teaching psychology too. My background's not in psychology, but a lot of teachers have used it to look at group dynamics. But yeah, it was really successful. And in the research, it was something like 1 out of 80 something students I had asked, if we used activities like this in class, would you be more willing to learn English? All but one said yes. Or that one, maybe there could be nothing I could do to get them to want to learn English.
We know that student.
Right?
We all know that student.
Right. So even just having some way to encourage those students who are, not super excited about English class because they think it has nothing to do with their actual life, when in reality it does. But a lot of times what happens in Taiwan is they discover that after they graduate university, and they realize, oh, wow, I should have studied more English class.
So
yeah,
go
sorry,
ahead,
right. No, I was going to say that reminds me of the game Coup.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's sort of like maybe a faster version, and maybe for a smaller group, where everybody also has a role and they have to figure out who the spy is, and they have to figure out why, and then they have to go on missions, and it's kind of cool. But it teaches the students to, if they accuse someone or if they suspect someone, they have to have evidence. And so that's one of the things that sometimes it's hard to have convincing evidence, especially in English when that's their second or other language.
Right.
But that gets them motivated. Now, if I do the activity in the book, it's it's not, they're done in like 2 or 3 minutes. So
yeah,
where's my want sound effect, right?
is it Coup? I wonder if I'm thinking of it. There's 2 games like that. Sorry, I'll check what I have.
Coup is definitely one, but it's maybe
what's the other one?
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Avalon, the Resistance.
The Resistance. That's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, the Resistance is the one I'm thinking of. I've got both of them. Mm-hmm.
I thought you were talking about the what's the Spyfall, or is that?
Oh, Spyfall. Oh,
I've seen that one.
I was preparing for this interview. I totally forgot about that game. That's another good one too.
Yeah, it's so there's Jessup Yenser is also an ESL teacher, and he's done some sessions that I've been to at DIESOL that talk about like using Spyfall as a game, and it's like, oh, there's a lot of really interesting. There's just so many cool different ways. But so you were talking about Werewolf, and I just want to kind of use this as a little base point for this question. So let's say I buy this deck of cards for Werewolf, and it costs me, I don't know, $15 or something, right? And that's on a cheaper game than, some of them get quite expensive depending on what you're playing. But how do you expand these games? So like if I say, hey, this is a game that's made for, well, this one actually is 7 to 35 players, so that's pretty good. But yeah. let's say that a lot of the games are like 4 to 6 players, and you spent $15 on it or $20 on it, and you don't have the money to go buy it 5 or 6 times to fill your whole class. How can you make games like? How do people approach spreading out their games so that they can work with it still inside of their budget?
Right. That's a good question. And I would say there's maybe 3 answers to that. I'm thinking, so one is something that maybe a lot of teachers are already familiar with. They're doing stations, and in those stations, you might have the quote unquote pre-lesson where they learn how to play the game through a video, maybe answer comprehension questions. The next station, they play the game. The third station is maybe not directly, it might be a wrap up maybe to the game. And then the fourth one might be unrelated to the game. That way you only need 1 copy of the game. I mean, I guess depending on the class size. Another thing is Werewolf is one that is, I mean, you could literally just design it on your own, especially in this environment, because you're not giving the cards across the computer, right? You have to kind of type them up.
Right. So you're digitally just typing up the same thing for the students to see. Right.
And even if you search like Werewolf game online, there's a Wikipedia with all the rules and roles, because it's based off of another game, Mafia, and I don't think anybody really owns. I mean, in board games, nobody owns the rights to a game mechanic.
Right.
They own the rights to the art and the language. But yeah, so you could actually use Werewolf without even purchasing a deck right now. Even in the classroom, you just write on a piece of paper. I've done that before.
Okay, so with a game like that, you can kind of expand. But what if we're talking about like a board game, like a proper board game with pieces that move around? Well, I kind of want to switch into like, and we could talk about different games that you like and recommend. But also, I'm just kind of interested in the idea, because I think a lot of teachers are like, okay, well, let's have you. One thing that I've done is I put in like on a Google slide, and then I make a background, and then I just give the students like a little icon that they can move around physically on the board or the background somehow. And that's one way that unlimited amounts of students can do things. But I'm just trying to think of, like when you get into complicated games, or when you get into things, how do you set them up? How do you set people up digitally? Or for you're playing games online now, I'm assuming. How are you doing it? How are you getting games going?
Right. I would say right now is a really great time for it, especially because even in the board game space, like the industry is racking their head around how do we still grow our community? How do we still grow our industry when people aren't able to meet in person to play games very much? Obviously you have families buying games, or like small, circles of people who are already together. So a lot of board game companies have created digital resources, some free, some paid, a lot of people in the community. So we put together a blog post of the best websites of 2020. And on that blog post, we have something, I think it's towards the bottom, is a community built Google Sheet with over 150 websites for places to play board games for free online.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we've shared those with teachers, and we've used some of those ourselves in some streams, and even taken some games that are like one recently called Monstrosity. This would be, I guess, really great for like descriptive language in English language teaching. And you essentially look at a card that is this crazy monster. You have 20 seconds to look at it and memorize it, and then you have to put it down. And you explain what it looks like to everyone else playing, and they have to draw based on what you're saying. And you have 2 minutes to kind of explain that. Again, I wouldn't say, don't worry too much about the rules here. You could probably do that a little bit longer for language students. But then after everyone reveals their drawing, the person who is trying to think of the monster by memory has to choose which one they think is closest to what they remember. And then everybody votes after they reveal what the monster looks like, which one actually looks the closest.
Ah, nice.
Yeah, so like taking things like that, taking games, you can kind of really adapt them for a virtual environment. And there are a lot of resources, a lot of board game companies like Monstrosity, the publishers, Deepwater Games, and they've streamed it to kind of show you, well, yeah, you can still pick up this game and you can still play it digitally with your friends.
That makes sense. Michelle, we got to get that onto our next Drinks with DIESOL. I think that's going to be. I'd love to see what people come up with for their drawings. You know, you can really imagine.
I talked about my favorite party game, Trapboard. This is another new top one.
Monstrosity. Cool. That is really cool. So I'm kind of lucky, and I only have 6 students in my language class. And then Brent, how many are you teaching this term?
Well, I've got one class is 35, so and so I know, Dustin, that you said you were teaching in Taiwan, so I imagine you had pretty large classes there. And I'm interested in how you used the flipped classroom approach to make sure that you could teach all those students and play games, because I do have friends who have large classes, and that's something that's difficult.
Right. Yeah. So I would, I guess, preface this with it did take some time to prep for this, and having the hindsight, I was happy I did it, but I was thinking I would be teaching in Taiwan for a little bit longer, and I would have these videos, these resources to kind of save my time down the road. But essentially I spent the summer preparing for this course, and I knew I was going to have over 50 students. I think one of my courses were 70 students. For a writing course. So I was like, I cannot read 70 essays like almost every week for just one class out of, I think I had 3 at that time. So I was like, what can I do? Well, I could flip the classroom. This is something that I had maybe read about or looked into. And with that, I, recorded the lessons and the resources online. And then I gamified the course in a way that was engaging and encouraging for them to show up to class, to participate, to complete their assignments, because I had assignments every week, but not all of them were graded based on points or graded based on completion.
Wait, okay. So hold on, Dustin, I'm going to stop you because we got to dig into this. Like this is actually super interesting. And I know a lot of teachers like me, I teach a writing class, right? And it's like, I'm like, wait, how'd you do this? What was every single step you did to make this work? And I mean, you don't have to give me every step, but I think people would be really interested to hear how you structured this class and how you made, how you tied in games and and gaming into a writing class, because that feels like a whole different step.
Yeah. Gosh. Why can't I think of his last name? I was going to share a couple people. I had a couple of podcasts I listened to. Well Played was one, and Game Level Learn was another one. So these are 2 podcasts I listened to kind of like throughout that summer while I was kind of generating ideas to think of how I could do this. And I'm trying to think back. I started with wanting a theme for the course. That was kind of my first thing. And you kind of need that first in my experience and based on what I had read and heard others do, because then you have this anchor point to create everything else around. And I chose Sherlock Holmes as the theme because there is a game called Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. And in this game, essentially, you are playing to defeat or to beat Sherlock to solve the crime. It's like, so the actual game is just basically like a choose your own adventure almost style game where you read about the case and then you decide where you want to go in the city. There's over like 100 different places you can go. And if you go there, it will tell you like what they say based on what you go there. Some things might be, oh, nothing happened here, just nothing to check out. Others might be, oh, well, I remember seeing this guy in this place. You might want to check that out. And that could be like a red herring. So it's may lead to nothing. But I use that as the theme because I rewrote the game for my language learners and use simpler language, simple vocabulary. So each week they were able to earn knowledge points, or KP, I called it. And this was related to their participation grade. So very low stakes. Like if you came to class, you got KP. If you completed your assignment, you got KP. If you played a game and you were the winner, you got KP. Very low stakes things. And they could use their KP to unlock different things in the game. So they're able to go to different places in the city based on their KP. So the KP was individually scored and then also scored as a group. And these groups were consulting or detective groups.
Jeez, this is like a huge effort you put into
this. This sounds so cool.
I mean, I'm like, how do I get in your class?
Very, very layered. And I'm prepping for this. I realized I should have maybe an episode or some resources to direct people to, because right now it's just kind of up in my head.
Oh yeah, you got to put this all
yeah,
together.
this is awesome.
Yeah, so sorry, continue. I mean, you don't have to.
No, yeah. And then where the flipped classroom tied in is I used Google Classroom, and again I went back to my theme and I called the classrooms like City of London class, whatever the number was. And this is where the video instruction was for the week. We talked about like, how to write an introduction, body paragraphs, concluding paragraphs, like hooks, all the things for writing essays. And then in class, what this allowed me to do is freed up like pretty much 3 hours of class I had each week with these students in the first 20, 30 minutes to kind of create relationships with students outside of just the one-on-one writing conferences that we did later in class. We played a game. So, and encourage them to come to class because, I get to come to class and we play a game in English. I practice my language. Maybe if I have some friends, I get to play games with my friends. And then what they also enjoyed were the writing conferences, because I was able to sit down with them and look at their writing with them, give them specific feedback on their writing in person. They had questions they could ask me. I could also like kind of gauge, are they actually understanding what I'm telling them, or do they need maybe some extra like encouragement or understanding?
They enjoyed their writing conferences.
Yeah. I'd say, I mean, there were some that, they don't want to come up and talk to the teacher, right? But eventually, I think
if I were playing something like that, I think I'd have a lot of fun.
So I also like this idea you're saying, kind of doing some of the flipped thing. You can kind of teach them a little bit about the game before they come in, and then they can actually play it. Because one of the things that I always struggle with my students is like balancing the time. It's like explaining all of these rules, and it's complicated, and how do you know this and how do you know that? And then when we actually play, and it's like, oh, sorry, we're out of time for a class, and we've got 10 minutes left. So I do like this idea of flipping. But I know that you also have some other ideas in terms of like how to help students learn the game without kind of taking the whole class doing it.
Right. And I think what's important, I guess, as English language teachers is if we are teaching something in class, it's clear, right? We want to provide visual aids for how to play. That's just important for learning a game for anyone, though, too. And you can create assignments for students on how to learn games. There's how to play videos for almost every board game out there. Again, board game companies usually reach out to these content creators to ask them, can you create a how to play video for my game? And usually those are available. You can ask them to watch those, create comprehension assignments or questions based on that. Ask them to look over parts of the rule book. You could even split that up into one group has to learn this part of the rule book while another group has to learn this part of the rule book, and they come together. They share those things in class. So you can turn the learning of the game into like a language learning activity as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's like, so that layers it for each part, right? So it's not just like, oh, you have to go figure out this part before we get into it. It's like they're already doing the learning as they're stepping right into, as they're preparing to actually do the fun part as well, right?
Right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and so now let's shift over to if an instructor is thinking about taking some of those gamification or game mechanics and gamifying their classroom. I know that you have a couple of helpful tools, and based on what you did in Taiwan. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I did after gamifying my course is I worked with my wife at in her school, in her high school, and she taught at an international school, but she taught the English language learners there. So essentially they were trying to graduate English class to go take the core subjects for high schools in the US. So they're a certified US based high school in Taiwan, if that makes sense.
Got it. Mm-hmm.
But they needed to pass a certain language level to be able to enroll in some of the classes. And so I took the ideas of gamifying the course and I wanted to create this toolkit that teachers can use no matter what their learning environment is. So it's still being developed. I had launched a Kickstarter last November, and with the pandemic, I wanted to kind of revamp it a little bit. I canceled the Kickstarter. I wanted to look back at it, but we ended up not being able to use it because it's really made for in-person, because there's a lot of digital resources for gamification. I don't know if you're familiar with like Classcraft or Class Dojo.
Mm-hmm. Classcraft, yeah,
yes.
both of them. Although Classcraft, I understand a little bit. I understand that more on the, like it's really like, here's your XP, right? Your experience points and your whatever, all the different points things. And Class Dojo,
I've used Class Dojo.
Okay.
Where you've got, well, I use some of the components in class because I haven't had a chance. My students come and go very quickly, so I can never get deep into it. But it's got badges, it's got points, it's got different characters that the students can choose. Timers, all sorts of cool tools in there that you can still use even if you're not using it with your class, like with each student. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I guess they're more focused on excuse me. From when I was doing market research at the time, I think Classcraft has kind of shifted a little bit, but they're more focused on the gamification of learning, where it's more of a classroom management tool versus game-based learning. And I wanted to employ more game-based learning strategies in this toolkit. So essentially it's like a narrative-based learning toolkit with some gamification, and students, they create characters, they go on an adventure throughout the course of your learning time, whether you want to do 2 weeks of it or a whole quarter. It's really up to you and how often you can use it in class. And you can plug in different activities into this narrative-based game. But it's still in development, and I guess if you have anyone listening that wants to try it out, I'm happy to send them the print and play to check it out with all the resources and everything they need to kind of try it out too.
Yeah, I think that sounds super interesting. I'm interested in this now because one of the things that I was always worried about with Classcraft was it felt like such a huge investment to get going, and I didn't know if my students were going to buy in, and so I never ended up actually implementing it into class, right? And so I like the idea you're saying, hey, you can just do this for a single unit or for a couple of weeks in this part. And so that makes a lot of sense to me as a way to help, because otherwise you're potentially investing a ton of time and effort and energy, and then does it work? Does it not work? Right.
And like you had mentioned, playing role-playing games, and that's one mechanic I really wanted to tap into with this is, we know we've played some role-playing games and we get really invested in the characters we're playing, right? Because we get to think of who they are. We come up with their stats. We come up with their backstory. We get invested with each session because we create a story with our character. And that's what I kind of tapped into with Worlds XP, is the gamification toolkit, where students get to create, they choose a character, but then they create their backstory, they create their relationships with other students. So there is an onboarding session for the game. It can be up to a class and a half, depending on how long your class periods are too, and how much you want to spend on it in that class period. But it's definitely a big overlay onto what you're doing. I would say it can't be a one-off thing, I suppose.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think people are nervous about putting in a little bit of effort into things, but I think it's like, with me, at least with Classcraft, I was like, ooh, a whole semester. Like, that's, 5 months of classes. And if it doesn't go well on the first day, I would be a little bit worried about that for sure. But I like this idea of like, yeah, let's try it out. Let's jump in, experimentation. If it works, let's continue. If not, move forward. Right.
Right.
And I've never heard of it. This is the first time, so I'm going to have to check it out and see what I can do with it.
Dustin, one thing that I wanted to ask is just any general recommendations for games that you've been enjoying, and especially ones that like kind of can help teachers get their brains thinking about like implementing into class. Like, it could just be a general answer of like, hey, just go play this game, it's awesome. But also, if you happen to have one or two that you think kind of, especially for ELTs, like things that might help them get their brains going for implementing more games into the classroom as well.
Yeah, I guess I would say definitely playing any game and paying attention to the language that is being used in the game, and how you could maybe create a activity based on it. I mentioned Monstrosity. I think this is one that I really am excited for when schools are back to in person, is bringing this just to schools and playing it with teachers, and then asking them, well, how can you see you could use this in your class? Because there's a lot of great stuff in that game that I think can be used in class or used in targeting different learning outcomes. Another thing, we mentioned Coup and the Resistance and Werewolf. There's boardgamearena.com. I think it's .com. And you can play games on there for free. They have a free version, and it's, I want to say, probably about 100 games on there. And then there's a premium version, which is like, I don't know, $2 or $3 a month, something very little, where you have access to a few more games, not very many extra games, but definitely worth checking out to see kind of what games to play. And again, right now is a really good time to reach out to board game communities, because everyone's online anyways, and you're going to find people willing to join you for a game. Like, for example, we play a game. We were playing once a week, and now about once a month, and we try to create some sort of audience interaction or way the audience can play along. So there's loads of board game Facebook groups you can check out that.
Wait, so you're playing a game and people can watch and participate from their computers?
Right.
How do people find that?
So our Facebook group is Board Game with Education. Usually that's where we're live at. We started doing it on YouTube too recently. Again, we're only doing about once a month now. We're going to reassess how often we do it here soon. So hopefully we'll start doing it again more often. But the first one that we started with the pandemic was called Nerd Words, and Nerd Words :science. So it's science vocabulary, but you can definitely use this with any vocabulary. And you have a word, I'm trying to remember the rules because it's been a while. You have a word that you need people to guess, and say the word is computer. You can give a clue with any letter in that word. So I can use OMPUTER. I cannot use C, cannot use this beginning letter. So I could use M, which might be like motherboard. I would use that clue.
That's a cool twist.
Yeah, and then the last clue, you get to use the first letter of the word. So then I could say like, I don't know, card maybe. And so each round you're trying to guess, and the quicker you get it, the more points you score, both as the clue giver and the guesser.
Okay.
I could see that. I could totally do that. I can totally come up with a version of that for my students.
Right. Yeah. You don't you don't really even need the game, but I would suggest maybe checking out the game too.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So if people wanted to get started in these communities, yours is there on Facebook, right?
Right.
And then also on your website, boardgamingwitheducation.com. There are lots of resources and all sorts of things over there as well.
So it is time for our fun finds, and today I have a really cool one. It is a school related one. This is from the EAP Foundation, and it's academic highlighters. I don't know if you've used them before, but you take any kind of piece of text, you paste it into a box, and it's going to highlight all of the academic the words from the academic word list, or words from a different any kind of sub list, any academic word list that you're looking at, it's going to highlight them for you. And then it's got a couple of buttons where you can create a gap fill exercise based on those words, or a part of speech, something like that. But that was really cool, and I can't believe I haven't heard of this. And this is, again, by the EAP Foundation, Academic Highlighter. So I'll have those in the show notes.
Awesome. So mine is Stream Deck. I don't know, Esol, if I showed this to you before, so cool. But this is my by far my favorite toy of the last of at least being on online teaching.
Of 2021.
It is so cool. So just to be clear on what this thing is, basically it's stream gamers and gamers use it for like different things, but for teaching you can use it. Basically, you can program in physical buttons. So there's little LCD buttons and physical buttons, and you can program in, your computer can do all sorts of different things just based on pushing the button. So you can program it to do a series of events, or I've got it connected to Zoom, so I can do it, just tap a button to turn my camera on and off, tap a button to share, tap a button to open up the browser, and I can start it off on a default website that I want it to. So for my writing class, for example, I can just tap a button and it'll open up a blank Google Docs. And so it's so cool, and I'm like thinking of all the different possibilities. I mean, I feel like my brain is just thinking of baby things right now, but you can put in all sorts of things. I've even got it tied to our smart lights, so if I've got it, you're not gonna be able to see it very well, but like the smart lights I can turn on and off by just pushing it. So it's I think this is probably the best investment for online teaching that I've done for a while. It's called Stream Deck, and it's made by Elgato. Dustin, what do you got?
That's awesome. I've seen that Stream Deck, and I've been considering picking one up. So maybe you just sold me on it.
Yeah, it's a little pricey, but like, man, I'm like, oh, this thing is so fun. And for like things like podcasting, and one of my friends who does another podcast, he was saying that he just pushes the button and then it opens up his GarageBand and it opens up his Finder and so it sets everything up just by one button, and it sets your whole computer screen up ready to edit and get into the editing workflow right away, or whatever it is you're trying to do. So definitely a worthwhile investment.
That's awesome. I would say maybe I'll just lean into the other hobby of mine, which is running. Okay. And I've really been using this. I subscribed to a coaching plan like, I don't know, about a year and a half ago now. I use it every day, just about, but I'm training for a 50-mile race in May. So I'm using Strava, and then this coach app called Final Surge is the name of the app too.
I don't even like to drive 50 miles. Well, but Strava is great though.
Yeah, I like to run, but I'm not ready for any kind of long distance marathon.
Yeah,
but that is very cool.
Yeah, that's amazing.
All right. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You could win a one-of-a-kind DIESOL pin by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. And I know we've checked, and there's nothing recently, but if you're giving us a shout out any other way, be sure to tag us. Yeah, we need them. Tag us on social media.
So for show notes and other episodes, please go check out diesel.org. And this episode is diesel.org/33, the number 33. And of course, you can listen to us on VoiceEd Canada, voiced.ca. You can also find us on Twitter. So you can find the show at DieselPod, and you can find me at Brent G. Warner.
You can find me, Esol, at ixy_pixie. That's IXY_PIXY. And Dustin, you're also on Twitter. Where can our audience find you?
Yeah. First, Brent and Esol, thank you again so much for having me on. It was really good. I feel like I could talk about this topic forever.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff.
Yeah, you can find me pretty much anywhere. Board Game with Education. My email is podcast@boardgamewitheducation.com. You can reach me there too. Anything Board Game with Education related best is on our website through our email newsletter, and that's boardgamewitheducation.com. And the newsletter is about the second thing on the main page.
Very cool.
Awesome.
In Korean, thank you is 감사합니다. 감사합니다 for tuning in to the DIESOL podcast.
Thanks, everybody.
See you soon.